All right, everybody, welcome to Winners Wallets and Worldviews. Today we had an awesome guest. His name is Christian Catron. Now, Christian is a West Point graduate of 2001. He also received his MBA from University of Texas at Austin in 2011. Now, Christian is a real estate developer and real estate syndicator, but also kind of built into this business as he had a full-time job in medical operations. So we'll talk about a little bit how you can go from a real estate as a side hustle to making it a multi-million-dollar revenue producing operation. And we get into the weeds on what his strategy is exactly on how he rehabs some of these multifamily units in the Dallas, Texas area. So folks, without further ado, welcome to the show.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you
how to be somebody.
Where in your life did you learn that you're not good enough?
Take what you're most passionate about and what you're most fearful of, and what is the plan to overcome that fear, and what is the plan to enact that passion.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews. I'm your host, AJ Armstrong. You can follow me on Instagram at AaronArmstrong33, or you can go to my website, AaronJArmstrong.com. And today we have a really, really special guest with us. We've got real estate developer, syndicator, investor, and we're going to dig into some really cool tactic tips, but he's also a West Point graduate, and he's got some really interesting story that we're going to listen to today, and then listen to how you guys can also take some of these tidbits and tactics and apply them if you're an aspiring entrepreneur or inspiring real estate investors. We've got Christian Catron on the other line. How you doing today, Christian?
I'm doing well, AJ. How are you, sir?
I'm doing so well. We're sitting here with COVID. We're sitting here with all this nonsense going on in the world. But we got people out there like you hustling through it. Just keep rocking. Don't slow down. I love it.
Hi, man. Same as you. I think all of us have this bug to not want to sit on the sideline, and really just to make sure that we're constantly improving our game and getting ready to advance the ball forward. So I'm super excited to be on the show, and thank you for having me.
It's so cool. I mean, people like you and we had Jim Young, and we actually met at the Black and Gold Summit that Brian Rodriguez put on. So we had a cool, if you guys are West Pointers or cadets or something, listen to this. We got some cool opportunities for you guys on the Black Gold Summit to come in and learn about real estate that's exclusive to the grad community. But with Jim Young, he was kind of in the same boat. It was interesting. He was talking about how, there's kind of these different phases of COVID. You have these people that are kind of victims to the situation. They're whether that's victim to the lockdown or victim to actually the disease itself. Then you have people that are kind of like adapting, and they're figuring it out with the situation of things that are happening, all the stuff that's going on with the government. Then you have people that are like you and Jim that are actually kind of leading, and they're helping people in different ways, and they're leading through it, and they're pioneering. I think that's really inspirational to see that there's not only just a response and there's not just an adaptation to it, but there's also this like being on offense in a way. It's cool to see people do that,
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think, there's opportunity to be found at every stage of the real estate cycle. And, it goes in cycles. And whether it's real estate or business or anything else, finding the right opportunities and really preparing for the opportunities that you can sort of peek around the corner is a key component. I think whereas many have sort of decided to sit on the sidelines, we've elected not to do that. There's a quote I like from President Abraham Lincoln when he said that if you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that's what the team and I have exactly been doing, is sharpening our axe so that when opportunities come about, we can be ready to start chopping. And some of those opportunities are coming about much sooner than we expected, actually, based on some of the deals that we're coming across. And so really excited about the pipeline that's growing and the momentum that we're experiencing.
I'm going to take a note because I want to come back to that a little bit about kind of the opportunities you're starting to see. But first, I wanted to kind of just ask you a little bit about, your upbringing, like tell me about Christian as a person and where you came from, and kind of what led you into this, your story.
Yeah. So I was born in the Philippines, sort of product of American exposure to the Philippine Islands, and Was born there, grew up there. A language called Tagalog, which is the primary language there, was my first language. Moved to the United States at the age of 7, and really, and this was in Michigan. This was the first time I ever saw snow, and I thought something was wrong when things were falling out of the sky that was not rain, and for the first time had a jacket that I had to wear. Having grown up on a tropical island, had never worn a jacket before. And actually, I've got a funny story about how I got into my first fight over a jacket.
Really?
The first week, yeah. So at any rate, yeah, grew up there, came here, learned English, watching cartoons like most immigrant kids, and really had aspirations to better myself, knowing what it was like to live in poverty for the first part of my life, and being without. And really, that was a lot of what the driver was for me to want more than I started with, coming from humble beginnings, and realizing that, you know what, I have an obligation, at least I felt, to be able to give back to these very same people, family members of mine who are still there today, but now I have this golden ticket, this opportunity to pursue what was possible in America. I think.
Oh, I was just going to ask, so but were both your parents from the Philippines as well? So you were like a full immigrant, or did you have one of your parents was from the United States, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I'm half Black, half Filipino. So my mom is Filipino. My dad was a sailor in the U.S. Navy.
Yep, got it.
So, yeah. So, you know, Tiger Woods, you know, typical as of that time. But, you know, very, very privileged, and so interesting because I kind of feel like it's, you know, it's not where you start, it's where you're at, and it's where you end up. A lot of people will look to how they came about, or whatever circumstances that they find themselves in, and will sort of feel bad for themselves and kind of wallow in that. And really, that's not what it's about. It's about, what are your goals? What are your dreams? What are you willing to do in order to get there? And so, you know, for me, I saw my opportunity coming to the United States and really living out what opportunities were available to me that most of my peers took for granted. Sadly, you know, a lot of our fellow Americans don't necessarily see that what we have is in fact a privilege and an opportunity, and we should be exploiting that in a positive way as much as we can, for our own betterment and to impact our communities.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. So then you get over to the United States, you're in Michigan now, you're seeing snow for the first time, you know, and you kind of come from humble beginnings. It is interesting, right? That immigrant story, that classic American dream story in a way. And just tell us a little bit about your experience with that. So you come over here, getting a fight over your jacket, you got snow falling from the sky, your head spinning, you know, what next?
Well, so the jacket story, it was hanging up, and towards the end of the day, I think this was either my first day or during that first week. And mind you, I didn't understand English aside from what, you know, Heathcliff and Fat Albert and some of these cartoons at that time that were pretty prevalent would teach and show. I didn't understand what these guys were saying. All I knew was that someone was putting on my jacket and I needed to come home with that. Plus it was a cold walk home. And so needless to say, we got in a little tussle over my jacket. But it wasn't long before we realized that we weren't cut out for snow, and we soon moved to San Diego, California after 8 months. And that's where I ended up growing up and going to school, and later went to school in New York. But I grew up in San Diego, and a very diverse atmosphere there, which was great, and really laid the foundation for the type of future that I had in terms of being in athletics and the camaraderie that we had there, regardless of what your background may have been. I was readily accepted among various groups of people, and found myself in sort of different groups, having been a straight A student with good grades, and yet being a pretty decent athlete, and also played violin, believe it or not, in the orchestra. And so a lot of different dynamics with different folks and different groups that I was all a part of, not to mention, sort of the diversity in terms of ethnicity and things like that. Was sort of a chameleon in a lot of ways, and was able to adapt and grow from that experience.
Did you find, you know, being a person of color was challenging in any ways growing up?
You know, I can't say that it was, or at least it was perhaps a little bit more subtle. And I think again, having been an athlete and having the academic marks that I had helped to shelter against some of that. And keep in mind, we grew up in a rough part of town, and my parents fought to source an inter-district transfer such that I could go to a school with more opportunities. And
Sure.
They happen to have a really good football team too, and I played that. But
Was that your sport, football, or was it several other ones as well?
I played football primarily. I played basketball, was not good at it, but I played football and ended up playing, my first year at Army.
What
And
position?
got injured, DB.
I got you.
So did well enough to go and be able to play for the Army team for at least a year before I got injured. But yeah, between athletics and things like that, it sort of kept me out of trouble and kept me out of groups that I likely would have, sort of fallen into.
Gotcha. So sports kind of kept you on the straight and narrow in a way, and more than that, you had academic, prestige and scholarship that ended up getting you into the academy.
Yeah, and again, I think the other thing is I had parents who talked to me about race relations and things to watch out for, and I had a lot of exposure to different cultures and different races, and so for me, I was able to go from listening to music that a lot of people who look like me would listen to or watch and talk and at our own culture. But then, I was also able to engage with other people who may have looked completely different and engaged in different activities. And when we were on the football field, we were all brothers and had no issues. And so I think that's one of the things that, as we consider and look around sort of what's going on in the world around us, is that, man, if there were more things that brought us together than drove us apart, it would be really nice. It's sort of overcome, centuries of things that have transpired to bring us to where we are today. But I think we all have a chance now to do something about where we're at and kind of what the world looks like.
Yeah, that's not, if you look at the history, especially half Filipino, half Black, I think that the being a Black American has its history. It's kind of well known, the history of slavery, but also the Filipino history, right? That the imperialism of the Americans in the islands, in the Pacific Islands, that was a part of it. And to come from both of those and then arrive where you are today is really interesting. And you credit a lot of that to your family. And I think that's a really important distinction for people to understand, because one of the things I thought was really impressive about you when I first met you was you had your kids there right with you, and you're getting up there to speak at the Black Gold. And, I could just tell, that you're just leading your family by example. And that's something that's just really important. And it's overlooked. It's so much today that the power of being a good father, the power of, spending time with your children and looking at it. So before we jump into the real estate stuff, I want you to just riff on that a little bit. Like, tell me what it means to you to be a father and how you've been trying to showcase that going forward.
Wow. There's a lot there. There's a lot,
a lot
there.
For just a couple seconds, right?
Well, there's a lot there. Yes. And just complete vulnerability. What I will tell you is that the father I grew up with actually was not my biological father, and despite that, there were many lessons that I learned from him, and whether or not the relationship is in a good place now or not is sort of irrelevant for me, because I think along the way I came to realize that I have a heavenly father.
Yeah.
And that's who I take my lead from. And so I think for me, it has been really inspirational to grow in my faith and to understand what it is to be a father, and how important that really is, especially when you think about statistics and when it's very evident that having a father in the home creates security and safety and stability for children. And you mentioned it, talking about both sides of my identity, ethnic identity, having a history of oppression. Oftentimes, not having a father in the home has led to the perpetuation of things like incarceration and other things that are just a byproduct of the system and how things have been and designed. And so for me, it's important to be a role model. I've had many mentors, but certainly credit my faith and the values that we espouse in terms of trying to implement in our own kiddos, and hopefully be able to instill values in them that can then help them better impact their communities as they grow older.
Yeah. And I think that's just absolutely the right answer too. When you look at, we talk about all sorts of worldviews as a third of this show, right? And when you talk about the Christian faith, which is something that's important to me, it does give a very, very practical foundation to being a family man. And, as Marissa and I, think about preparing myself to be a father and her being a mother, grounding it in those biblical roots is really a beautiful thing. And I think it's very difficult to even argue with the empirical evidence that supports of having a father in the household and having, the influence and the leadership of being a spiritual leader. So you're just a person that, you do that by example. And it was just really inspiring to see that and relieving to see that of how you manage all this craziness, all this stuff you got going on, which we're going to talk about in a second, and you still maintain a healthy relationship like that.
Craziness is the right word for all of it. Yes. But no, I appreciate the kind words. It's definitely a deliberate and intentional effort. And I certainly haven't arrived by any stretch, but I do acknowledge and realize where the goal is, and that's what I'm shooting for. And whether I fall short or not, we're moving down that path. And my kids are very gracious with us as we navigate the waters. And I think we are living in a day and time now where the involvement of fathers seems to be much more than it was in the generation before ours. And whether that's just sort of an evolution of how things have come to be, or there's a wide recognition that, fathers played a very important role in family dynamics and things. Regardless of what the cause of it is, I think it's just comforting and nice to see that. And so, I'm certainly trying to do my part and try to be example for others, but hopefully in the course of leading my own family, I'm able to better influence other folks.
Yeah, it's inspiring, really. It is. You're leading by example, and I think you're doing the right things. So it's just a cool way to kind of see people that have a lot of excuses for a lot of things, whether it's starting a business, whether it's getting into real estate, whether it's being a family man, whether it's being present in their family. That doesn't have to be, you could be physically present, it's a lot mentally present. We've talked about that before on this show, and it's just, it's cool that we're seeing that. And that your faith is such an integral part of that relationship. Most people that I know that look like they have had the most successful marriages, something I'm writing about too on the small section of relationships in my book. It's like Billy Graham had a great quote that said, "The secret to a happy marriage is two great forgivers." It's just stuff like that, and that's just powerful. I think it's this beautiful way of thinking about how that dynamic can play out. So, well, you're a family man, you're incredible. So back to your story a little bit. We're at West Point now, you're rolling through it. Tell me a little bit about your experience there and how it led into your military career, and then what got you into real estate.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the thing I'll say about West Point is I had no idea what West Point was until my senior year of college, or my senior year of high school. And as weird as that might sound, it's the true story. I started getting letters from the admissions office in these gray envelopes that had the West Point crest and, of course, the address there. And then I started getting letters in these yellow envelopes with this letter A and a mule or a horse or something that looked like a horse kicking its rear legs. And I would just turn it over, and I was confused because it was Army football, and it had the same zip code as this other thing that I would get. And so at some point it became evident that, oh, okay, maybe this is the football team that's somehow tied to this school called West Point. And as a side note, I used to think, as silly as it sounds, that the Army-Navy game was this really cool annual event where they allowed soldiers and sailors to come from shore duty or wherever they were stationed and play on the football field.
You mean that's not what it is? A lot of people think that. A lot of people think that. Yeah.
That's what I thought. And so, long story short, once I started getting that correspondence, I began researching, and between it being just a really exciting opportunity to play Division I football, for the academics, of course, the leadership training component of it being still is the premier leadership institution in the world, and then also it being free, at least to my parents. I didn't want them to owe anything after I got out of college. I certainly didn't want to owe anything. And then I found out along the way that they actually pay you while you're there.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize that. And so all of those things combined, I think, even as a young man, as an 18-year-old, I realized that, I didn't want to be in debt, and I didn't want to owe a lot of money after I graduated, and I wanted to have some career stability after graduating college, unlike, unfortunately, a lot of students now who are graduating after 6 years, mind you, with a tremendous amount of debt and not having any kind of job security or a job at all, and certainly not oftentimes not a job in their field of study. And so for us, it was a really neat opportunity to study at a premier academic institution, and to have this guaranteed job blowing stuff up after you graduate was a really cool prospect, and one that was very, very exciting. As far as the transition to the military is concerned, my military career was short-lived due to an injury I sustained at West Point 6 weeks prior to graduation, and so ultimately I only ended up serving 2 years before my transition. But was a really great experience during the time that I was in. Can't say that like all of us didn't enjoy every moment of it, but there's so many different lessons and different things that you take with you for the rest of your life, both from your academy experience as well as your time in the military, the friends, the camaraderie, and all of those things were just things that you take with you and you miss, and that you try to somehow infuse into the organizations that you're a part of moving forward.
Yeah, very similar story to me. I could tell we're cut from the same cloth in that way, that you have the idea of, like, when you're 18, you're sitting there like, hey, how can I make the best financial decisions for my future? And you kind of pull that thought of a lot of those benefits at West Point. You wanted to be a leader. You wanted to do some really cool altruistic and inspirational things with the military career. But also you had a career that was cut short due to an injury, much like myself. But, I think it's kind of cool to see that thought process led you into where you are today. It didn't start when you just decided one day you wanted to be successful or an investor. You said from the very beginning, I want to start the earliest I can to start positioning myself for financial success. And a lot of people who could listen to this at all ages can start making those decisions. Like you just mentioned, how do I avoid getting into college debt? How do I avoid choosing meaningless degrees? Or how do I avoid, all these types of things that society pressures us into doing? And like, I'm not a guy that's like a drop out of college guy. And I'm also not a guy that's like, you have to go to college. I think it's just super unique to what you're going to do with that and what tools you kind of have to work with. So it's cool to hear, kind of your thoughts on that as well. And, but you kind of so you get a discharge from the military. Now you're kind of in the civilian world. And when did you start like becoming a real estate investor, or did it start before that?
No, well, so sort of a dual track. Firstly, because of so much time I spent in hospitals and clinics and things like that, it really inspired me to want to pursue a career in healthcare. And so, for the first, 15 years or so post military career, I've just been growing up per se in the healthcare space, and have grown into different leads over the course of that time. and took a little bit of a break to pursue my MBA at the University of Texas. And
what specifically in healthcare were you doing?
So I started off doing sales training, sales
Gotcha.
management after my business school transition to operations.
Gotcha.
And so I mentioned that because, especially the operational piece, because the skill set that I developed there is so transferable to what I'm doing in real estate as a real estate operator. And so, when I first got out of the military, while I was starting my healthcare career, I had, even at that point in time, aspirations to do something in real estate, in large part because of what I studied and realized with sort of the wealthiest Americans, again, having that desire to want to fully utilize the opportunity given to me, having come to America. The wealthiest Americans either obtain that wealth through real estate, or as a result of that wealth, needed tax advantages and other forms of advantages that come with real estate. So I started studying that a little bit, and then ultimately made my first mistake, really buying a fourplex sight unseen in Niagara Falls, New York, and learned some lessons very early on about what not to do, that have helped to lay the foundation for sort of the success that we would later have. And so, a lot of cutting my teeth early on with starting out the real estate career. I think even with that, I realized that, I made a decision to, maybe I should just focus on my healthcare career and not pursue real estate at that time. So I actually laid it to the side for the next 15 years or so. And the only type of real estate that my wife and I would buy was, our primary residences, and did a couple of those over the course of time. But then I think as I continued to grow in my healthcare career and being blessed with opportunities to increase my earning potential and things, I too found myself in that position where I started looking for additional tax advantages and things, and that brought me back to real estate. and hearkening back to the experience 15 years prior, I knew that the thing that we needed to do this time around, I say we, my wife claims to have been an innocent bystander in all of this. her passion is women's health, whereas mine is in real estate. I knew that we needed to obtain a formal education of sorts. And what I found throughout all this, and part of what I teach and share with people, is that you're going to pay your tuition one way or the other to learn what you need to learn. Either you're going to pay it through a formal type of a program that allows you to obtain the curriculum and the study material and mentorship and coaching and guidance and all those things that are invaluable, or you're going to learn through mistakes that you're going to make along the way. And I've got plenty of mentors of mine whose mistakes that I am the benefactor of, and that they will tell me about mistakes that they have made, and interestingly how, despite even a couple of months after having received that education, or in the midst of that education, we would have discussion, and it would seem as though I was already in the space for 5 or 10 years, having learned all the things that they had been learning or had learned over that course of time. And so, I truly believe in education. And so that's really what's prompted me to develop this mastermind that we'll talk about here soon, is to be able to enable people, not only, opportunity to learn from me, but also to have resources that I have at my disposal now that they would otherwise take a significant amount of time and money to accumulate, just like we have. So
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned you're going to pay your tuition one way or another, and that is very true. Some people like me are you got to touch the stove to make sure it's hot, and then the other people are kind of like, hey, maybe I could listen to some wiser people out there and learn from their mistakes. I mean, I was in that boat, right? My first development, I tried, lost about 50 grand on it. So it hurts. It hurts to lose that. You could get a full college education for 50 grand, right? But
coincidentally, 50 grand is what it cost for this education program that I mentioned to you.
Yeah, but you could
So-
actually spend the 50 grand and get, get something out of it too. But you learn mistakes one way or another. And I think that
That's right.
it's all positive outcome, no matter how you cut it, but it would be a lot better to get tangible, tactical network, things like that you're kind of mentioning. I wanted to kind of just ask you, what was that thing, the number one thing that you thought you learned from that first experience with real estate? Or the biggest theme that you kind of had coming out of that, other than the educational piece, what was it that you thought burned you that you would not do again?
Two things. One is due diligence. I think I had done an okay amount of due diligence in terms of exploring what the operational expenses may in fact be for that deal. All the different components that go with due diligence. I certainly didn't know enough about the market. Part of our due diligence process now involves a full market analysis with rental comps and really looking under the hood, kicking the tires, removing the tires, looking at the disc brakes. I mean, it's more comprehensive than that first go around. And so really the importance of due diligence is one key learning. I think the other key learning is the bigger, the better in terms of risk mitigation. And what I mean by that is, for example, we're buying apartment buildings, and we're looking at now ones that are 80 plus units. 2 hours ago, I was on a phone call with a seller of a 624 unit deal. And so we're looking at massive size units simply because you can afford to engage in a extensive renovation project where you might be down 30% in occupancy while you're doing that project, and it will still be self-sustaining. Sure. The fourplex that I had, one person left and it was vacant by 25%, and then another one, and I was down to 50%. And during that time, especially during the winter and some of those other things that I didn't fully account for, it takes a while to get a new tenant in there. Meanwhile, you've got those expenses don't go away, neither does the debt on the property. And so, buying cash flowing properties day one that fully is self-sustaining is a key component of what our deal criteria is in terms of what types of assets that we're buying.
So it sounds, So not to jump too far ahead, but I mean, sounds like what one of the things you do now is you look for larger units, because there's more units, you have a little bit more flexibility when those units are vacant, that's when you go renovate them, usually when you go unit by unit. Or do you undertake like massive, reconstruction and you kind of empty the whole unit, go in, do a project timeline? The project's like super stressful because you have to hit a certain timeline before you can start filling it up with tenants, or you just kind of piece it out one by one kind of thing, or both? So
before I answer that, I'll say the other thing about having multiple units or larger size properties is that while it does help to mitigate risk as well in terms of the downside risk, it's also the multiple effect in terms of any type of incremental rental growth for an individual unit. You now multiply that by a lot of units. And so that in the commercial world, that's really what defines the value of the property. And so if we're in the value creation business, the more units, the better. Of course, what that then leads to is, well, how do you then take down a large a large property with multiple units? And that's a whole another story that we may get into. Getting back to your question though, typically our process is we'll start with the outside in order to provide, that level of beautification, if you will, and that curb appeal, so that people coming onto the property who had never seen it wonder, how did this new property get here? I've never seen this before. Well, that's because we're repositioning that asset, starting with the outside, and then also at the same time starting to renovate all the vacant units. And so while we're renovating the exterior, we're also renovating the interior units that are currently vacant, so that we can then begin to market those newly renovated units at the higher market rents. And so what the new potential tenants see is this beautiful property from the outside, and then they go into an interior unit that's been renovated, and they see this beautiful interior property, and they have no idea what the condition of that property was just a month ago. And so, that's really what helps to start beginning to drive that value. Now, what then happens is, and really before we allow any external prospective tenants to come in, we'll offer the opportunity to upgrade to the existing tenants and allow them to transfer to those newly renovated tenants. And once they see those newly renovated tenants, they're just in awe and are willing to pay what the market rent is. And so as an example, the property that we have in Arlington, right across the street from Cowboy Stadium, it's a 44 unit place. 28 of the units needed rent. And we knew going in that the value growth opportunity was there because 8 of the 44 were already rented at $1,300 per month, whereas these other 28 were at $750 per month when we got it under contract. By the time we closed on the property, all 28 had increased to $850 per month. And that $100 increase over 28 units at the local cap rate implied a $500,000 value. And so we only have 6 units remaining. So we've done 22. The majority of those have come, the majority of the new tenants are transfers from the very same units that we've.
So you swap them kind of.
So we swap them. And so now, they're paying, the market rent is $1,350. So
right.
Much higher than, even higher than what we expected. We were in my underwriting, again, being conservative, we estimated getting up to $1,200, and we're now at $1,350, which is very, very exciting. And so ultimately, when it's all said and done, we bought the property at 3.8 and very likely $0.8 million, and very likely it'll be valued at 6.7 million.
Wow.
And then we'll do it's the burst strategy. So we'll do a cash out refinance, return all the capital to the investors, and then everybody will retain their position while they continue to get cash flow there forward.
How many years do you usually let that build equity before you cash out refinance?
So what's really exciting about this is when I pitched it to investors, we had a 2-year time horizon, and we're down to our last 6. I was just told today that we'll be fully complete with all the renovations in a week. And so that will put us at 9 months. So we've only had the property 9 months.
Wow.
So, in order to do the refinance, there are requirements by the lender, some seasoning, basically 90% occupancy for 90 days is the threshold that they typically will have before we execute that refinance.
Wow. One quick question on, so you talked outside curb appeal first, then you start going into the units. As those units become, renovated, those vacant units, you can move in some new renters into those units, charge the higher rent, swap, then go renovate their old unit. Where does the kind of the common area in some of these units come into that process? Is that part of the curb appeal, or is that part of the interior renovation? How does that look? Like any hallways or common areas, clubhouses, stuff like that?
Yeah, so the hallways, if they're interior hallways, we'll do those last. And the reason for that is simply because of the heavy traffic of the contractors to and from the individual units, and wanting to make sure that if we, take care of that it's not ruined in the process. And so typically when they're approaching their final unit is when we'll also do the renovation for the interior hallways and things of that nature. Most of the properties that we are acquiring are called garden style apartments, where most of the amenities are outdoors anyway. So pool, clubhouse, laundry facility, barbecue areas, those types of things. And so there's very few sort of internal amenity type of locations.
Sure.
And so, but those things would be part of the exterior renovations, since again, most of ours have those things on the outside.
Got it. And then this is probably a loaded question, but something that personally intimidates me is the idea of the underwriting, right? Is because, you want to make a conservative projection. If it's so conservative, you don't go forward with the deal because it's not going to make any money. But you got to find that sweet spot. So I think, accuracy is also important. Do you have any, obviously signing up for your course and doing some of those things, we'll kind of learn your process, but are there any other tips you could share of how to get that down to a pretty good number when you start doing some of the underwriting for your own numbers and pitching investors and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the most important aspects of this whole process. I mean, you hit it right on the head there. I would say for learning an underwriting process first and foremost is key, because before you decide to pursue a deal, obviously you need to know what you would be willing to pay for that deal. There are professional, shops out there that, and I think you and Jim talked about this when you guys talked, but there are professional shops out there that you can outsource that part of the process to. That's what they do, and they can assist with that. But even before you decide to go down that path, like anything else, you sort of want to know how to do it on your own. So typically, high level, if you get a set of financials, you can feel pretty confident that the last 3 months of revenue, you can annualize that in order to get a sense for what the most up-to-date revenue might look like for the property, right? Because if they've done a renovation project themselves, then you can see how the rent has grown over the course of time, and you want to use sort of the most current quarter to see, okay, how is this likely to perform from a revenue and collection standpoint. At the same time, the reason why you want to do that is because you might have something called COVID that comes about that could cause occupancy depression or rent collection depression of some type, that you don't want to pay a value based on what collections and revenue was like 12 months ago, when in fact for this particular property it's been severely depleted for whatever reason, i.e. a pandemic, that then now reduces the overall value for that property and what price you should pay for it. As far as expenses are concerned, you can usually take the last 12 months in its entirety and use that as a starting point for what the operational expenses may be, adjusting for a couple of very important items, namely taxation and what the taxes may in fact be moving forward, assuming that you're paying a higher price than the current appraised value of the property, which is typically always the case. And if you do not do that, you will find yourself in a very rough position, because as I looked at earlier today, one deal, the taxes alone double based on the new value of the property that we would be purchasing it at. And so it would have been an incremental $120,000, and that's the entirety of the margin, the entirety of the profit margin on that particular deal. So those are just some key, very high level methods that are applied in terms of underwriting a deal. And there's a lot of different other nuances and things like that. As far as even specific line items, how much you should assume per unit, for example, despite what information you may have received from whomever brought you the deal. So there's a lot involved to be sure, and understanding and learning the process. It's as much an art as it is a science.
Right.
And so, understanding what levers you can pull, what dials you can turn, and being, again, as you said, as conservative as possible, but also trying to remain competitive. I think the better you can understand how you can increase the value and create value with a property, the better. And that's part of what can juice both your annual returns as well as the overall value of your properties.
Let's talk about that really quick then. As far as what you're looking for when you're looking for something that's undervalued, so that you can kind of find those right opportunities. And you're just kind of, we talked about being opportunistic. You're just driving by and you're like, this could be undervalued. What's going through your mind? What's your process of thinking to find those deals? Are you finding them on the MLS, LoopNet? Are you getting deals from brokers? Are you just, knocking on doors of deserted homes? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, so it's hard to knock on doors the same way you would in the residential space, which we've done when we started out that way. Because prior to getting into commercial, we did start off in residential, having done some flips and wholesaling and private money lending and some of those things before we pivoted a couple of years ago into doing commercial only. And so, there are other methods that you can be employing in the sourcing of opportunities. Working with brokers is a great way to go in order to establish those relationships and creating trust there, so that as they get opportunities, you become sort of their go-to guy, especially if you've demonstrated the ability to close on a they've sent you in the past. You can feel pretty sure that they're going to reach back out to you when they have another deal. Going on LoopNet to find those brokers is a good way to start. Oftentimes the best deals are not going to be found on LoopNet, but
Right.
The brokers that you can then begin finding, establishing a relationship with is something that you can find there. I think, as I've stated at other times, being in the game and engaging with contractors and real estate attorneys and other folks that are in this space, title companies as well, that have access to information about what opportunities may be available. I think working with even mortgage brokers who have access to information about when loans may be maturing, for example, that is a key component of when and why people are selling in this space. Oftentimes properties in this space have a 5 to 10 year time horizon before they need to trade again. And as a matter of fact, earlier today, I was on a phone call with a seller who the time horizon they were approaching the end of their time horizon, which was the 5-year mark. And they were looking to basically sell the property now. So finding those opportunities really is just a matter of having and developing an expansive enough of a network so that as opportunities come about, that you can be amongst the first folks that they might call to present those opportunities to.
Gotcha.
That said, you can also be doing, some of your own sort of lead generation and things, depending on how vertically integrated you want to be in terms of your lead generation, marketing, and other things. There's certain lists that can be bought of property owners. The challenge sometimes with commercial property is almost always going to be in a legal entity where you don't readily know who the owner is. And so there's a bit of fact finding and things that you would need to undergo in order to get to who it is that you need to speak to about selling that property potentially.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I think bottom line is finding deals and finding money are the two most important things in real estate. And if you can't find deals, you're going to be short of one side of that equation.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about when you talked about just the network, right? You talk about how, like, for example, we know some real estate attorneys that have been very helpful for helping us find landlords, owners, and things that are struggling, right? So then they could be like, hey, it's a privacy thing. We talked to this person. We said, hey, you could be an investor, and they can kind of broker that relationship if they're consulting with somebody that is struggling. So it's an opportunity to where you can be like, hey, I can help this guy out or this person. So I get you on the idea of finding these off network or these network based ideas, right, for investing. One of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit was you finally get a deal like that, or you got an opportunity. What are you looking for as far as saying, I think this is undervalued here, and here's where my team can specialize in increasing this value? Is there specific
Sure.
things you're looking for exactly? I know in residential, it's like kitchens, bathrooms, right? You can really quickly say kitchens, that's just easy, right? Kitchen's, bathroom, okay,
Right.
kitchen's outdated, bathroom's outdated. We can increase the value, $45,000 by putting 15 into that, that
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah, no, good question. I think there are two big levers to increasing value. There are many others, but the two big ones are if it's under rented, meaning how does the rent for that subject property compare to the comparable properties in that same market? If for example, well, just as a point of reference, the property that I mentioned to you in Arlington for us, I really didn't need to go and do much of a market survey because I already knew within that same property, there were already 8 units that had this higher rent. And so even the in-place rents for that property proved that the remainder of the units, if I renovated them to a certain level, could in fact achieve that higher rent. So if I get a rent roll from a property and I see, well, how do the rents compare to the highest rent there, then that gives me some confidence that those rents could be raised if I add the value that's needed there. Similarly, if I'm looking and I'm doing some market research and I'm looking at my subject property and rents are $800 a month, and yet at the same property or on the same street, there's a property that was built in the same year, has a similar look and feel, similar amenities, and yet they're getting rents that are $200 or $300 more. I know that my subject property is under rented. Now I have to go see, well, what's the difference? Oh, those guys did an extensive renovation a year ago, and they added, granite countertops and the wood flooring and the blinds, and they've got stainless steel appliances and the whole nine. That's why they're getting those higher rents. If I do that same thing here, there's a chance I can get that same outcome.
So you're looking at, when you're saying under rented, you're talking more on the actual price, right? So like the price of the unit that you're charging could be charged much higher if I did these types of renovations.
If you're adding value to the units, then you can feel confident that you can charge a higher price because now it's worth more.
And you're looking for the biggest gap you can probably find, right? Like these are.
Yeah, I mean, the bigger the spread, the better. There's also, there's analysis that you would need to do in terms of how much of a return you can get depending on how much you're investing per unit. The same thing in residential space. But you are looking for properties that have units that are under rented and that have that value add component based on interior renovations.
Now, with that, is there a piece you're looking at of the volume of rentals? For example, if there's a lot of it is vacant, are you looking at that as a potential value opportunity too, or are you looking more at just the spread of the price?
Yeah, so that brings me to the second point, which is number one is it under rented, and then number two is is there an occupancy increase play available here? I'm typically not looking at completely vacant properties because again, I want to be able to see that there's a history of cash flow that has sustained the property, or that there's some form of a cash flow stream or a revenue stream that currently exists. If it's completely vacant and if it's completely vacant next to a fully occupied property that's thriving, okay, I have some confidence that if I do some work to this, I can create value. But if it's completely vacant, it's off the beaten path, and I have no idea what the demand is going to be, that's very, very risky. And so I'm not going to pursue that. There are some people that will, and that's their plan, and to some degree it can work depending on your cost basis and how much you put into it. But for me, it's highly, highly risky. But if there is an occupancy increase play, let's say the property is currently occupied at 75%, and that's largely because there's not a professional management company and a leasing person or an office person, even part-time, that's been responsible for generating leads and leasing the property up. Clearly, that's a management issue, and that's in fact, I looked with a fellow West Point buddy of mine. In fact, roommate of mine, we're looking at a deal now where that's exactly the play, is to increase the occupancy.
Got it.
So, yeah.
But if a property was like fully occupied or very high percentage of occupancy, you would look at that as a disqualifier in a way, because it would be difficult to add more value to that property, and it's probably priced more appropriately.
It depends. Going back to the Arlington property, it was at 100% occupied.
Okay.
But again, that play was under rented, and so we knew that there was a value creation play there based on the rent increase, even though it was at 100% occupied. The double-edged sword there as well was that all of those were on month-to-month leases, and so that's good from that's good from the standpoint of those folks are maybe on their way out anyway, and especially once they see that we're adding improvements to the property that are going to warrant a market rent. And so that did in fact help us as we renovated that project, and that's probably why we were able to finish more quickly. But it's also sort of scary from how can I sustain the property and all of its expenses if all of these are on month to month, and what if they all leave at the same time, right?
Yep.
And so that's another component to look for when you're underwriting the rent roll is
Gotcha.
what does that look like, and how does that play into your overall business plan?
Yeah. So it's not to codify it too much, but it's more of an and or statement than it is an and statement. You're not necessarily looking for both it to be undervalued for the rent and then also under occupied, but you're looking for both opportunities if they're available, and the more the merrier kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think one last piece that I'll add that I try not to bake into our underwriting is additional income opportunities. I think the beauty with, first of all, the premise in commercial real estate is that the value of that property is based on how much income it's producing. So it's net operating income, unlike the residential space where it's based on sold comparables, right? And so when you're talking about increasing the net operating income, you've got a couple of major levers, which is increasing the revenue or reducing expenses. And so with regards to increasing revenue, we've got the opportunity to increase rent, like we've talked about, through value add programs. But then there's also other components of revenue that we haven't discussed, which fall under the additional income opportunities. And so, think about things such as, reserved parking or covered parking, or like we're starting to do at one of our properties, adding internet and cable for all the tenants, where, we would be sourcing it for our cost, and then we would be pricing it at a certain amount that is still significantly less than what they would otherwise have to pay for cable and internet for that same product. And yet we're able to provide it as a value added service that now enables them to have that amenity, but at a discounted price. Mm-hmm. And yet we have a significant margin on that as well. Things like, pet rent, storage units, other things that then add to the amount of revenue that you're getting, which is especially good if it doesn't even cost you anything. One of the things that we're applying to one of our properties is a valet trash program. Well, we already pay a maintenance man to do stuff at that property. Let's just add to his list to go by every morning to all the units and pick up the trash that the tenants have put out there by 8 a.m. and take it straight out to the dumpster. And for that, we can charge $3 a month. And that $3 a month times X number of units begins to add up. And so those are just some of the small ways that can have some really big, value creation components to your property.
Sure. And talk to me a little bit about, before we jump on to the next topic, just kind of you talk about increasing revenue, some opportunities there you mentioned. What about expenses? What are some tips that you're looking for, or mismanaged properties that see higher expenses in this area that should be shaved down, kind of thing?
Yeah, no, so operational efficiency is key in the real estate space, just as it is in any business, being able to reduce your operational expenses. Some of the things that we find, for example, is utilities utilization. If the property is paying for all of the utilities and not passing on any part of that to the tenants, then they have to continue to bear that burden unless they get some kind of relief through sharing of that with the tenants that then helps offset that. That's not necessarily saying that you're reducing the amount of utilization, of utilities, things like electric and water and things, but rather sharing some of that cost with the tenants so that, you know, you're able to bring your NOI up. Something else that we find is, you know, something as simple as changing to a different insurance carrier can make a big difference with a property. And some of the cost for insurance can get pretty costly depending on the size of the property. You know, marketing expense, one of the things that we're doing at a property is we're spending what I feel like is a lot of money to have a website. And when I asked our property manager about that, they informed me that actually there's an alternative that would cut the cost of that website expense by half. Let's do that. And so a lot of other things that help to be able to shave off costs like that without compromising, you know, the service that's being delivered to the tenants, of course. But yeah, I mean, reducing expenses is a key component. Now, the thing about reducing expenses is, you know, like your own household budget, there's only so much that you can reduce expenses.
Right.
At some level, there's a floor there. That's why it's good to be creative and think about different ways that you can increase revenue, so that you can further increase that spread between your revenue and your expenses, thereby driving up your net operating income.
Yeah, there's no bottom line without a top line, right?
That's right.
No, that's incredible. Right. Well, gosh, we're getting into so much good stuff, but there's just so much here. And before we kind of transition into kind of some words of wisdom you have for the folks, I want to talk a little bit about how we can get more involved with this mastermind. This sounds like a really cool opportunity for, you know, I think real estate investors of all levels, because like you mentioned, you can start out small, or you could start off kind of whatever area you want to start in, but there is a lot of, little do you know, there is a lot of lower risk to doing bigger projects if you know what you're doing.
Sure.
And I think that's something that people might not understand very well. And I think this could be a cool platform for that. So can you just talk a little bit about this mastermind that you're working on and how people can get involved with it?
Yeah, I think what I found over the course of the last couple of years now is based on the success that we've been blessed with, and you know, this thing called social media that you can use as an outlet to provide exposure to some of these successes and things. People have naturally, I've been overwhelmed, quite honestly, with the amount of requests to be able to help folks, which is something that I want to be doing, and I love to do, is to be able to give back. And so, as a result of that, I've created and formalized this program, which is a mastermind, which at its core effectively is a joint venture partnership program. And what it entails is the opportunity to partner together on deals, with the understanding that, you know, each of us individually, because of especially, you know, depending on your upbringing and your personality and whatever pedigree you might have as far as your schooling is concerned, if you're getting into real estate, chances are you're sort of type A and are willing to go hunting for your own bunny, if you will, out in the forest. And while we could be successful potentially doing that, I think we have a greater chance of success forming a hunting party and going after really big game. And so
Right.
that's sort of the analogy that I use. And so when we take that approach and we bring our combined skill set and network and resources together, we can go out and get a woolly mammoth, if you will, and each of us, with a small percentage of that kill, can eat for much longer and better than if you went out for our own individual game. And so that's really the premise there. And so what we've done is I've created this program where people can partner together. I've created and identified different roles that are typical with a real estate transaction that people can play. It's broken down into, the sweat equity, so the work, and then also the money. And on the work side, you've got things like serving as the boots on the ground, being the deal finder. So for example, if somebody in their local market finds a deal that falls into their lap, and they have no idea what to do with it. Well, by virtue of being in the mastermind, they bring that deal to the group and we evaluate it and we determine, oh, that's too easy. Let's take that down via our collective effort. And that person who brought the deal, they automatically get 5% of the ownership interest, for example, while other people have different roles on the team. They could also serve as the boots on the ground, which we've allocated, I think, upwards of 10% of ownership interest in that. So there's a lot of different roles that people can play. And then on the money side, similarly, if someone is helping me with, the earnest money deposit, for example, or some of the upfront costs that we typically have to incur, I'm trying to create opportunities for people to engage and be part of the process while also helping me because of the extensive amount of resources that are required. Collectively, we're able to have synergies because we're working together. And I don't mind being sort of the conductor in front of the orchestra, trying to lead the effort because somebody needs to, and I'm willing to do that. The other piece of it is, the resources. There are documents, legal documents. There are deal analyzers. There are tools, marketing tools. There's a lot of different things that I've been able to accumulate that would cost a pretty penny for folks who are starting out. I remember my first syndication documents, the PPM, the private placement memorandums, cost $10,000 just for pages and pages of paper that my SEC attorney produced, which was worth the money because it helps to safeguard us as a real estate syndicator as well as our investors. But they have access. The mastermind members have access to that, for example. And then last but not least is what I call knowledge and skills. And so we have on a monthly basis a webinar where I feature a keynote speaker that talks about a relevant and important topic. Last month, we had my mortgage broker come and talk about the state of the capital markets. This month, we've got my real estate attorney coming to talk about standard purchase and sale agreements and the importance of title insurance, for example. And so along the way, we're providing value to our members in terms of knowledge and skills that they're picking up. And then lastly, we have different events throughout the year. Our next live meetup event is actually a fishing trip out of Orange Beach, Alabama, taking place towards the end of August, wherein we'll rent out a boat and we'll go out deep sea fishing all day Saturday, and then that evening I'll be providing a presentation and some training and teaching on real estate syndication. And so really a deliberate effort to mix lead with business. And providing folks an opportunity to learn while also having fun. So those are the bones of the mastermind. And so I invite anybody who might be interested in either learning what we're doing from a limited partner position or perspective, and then also those aspiring to be a general partner in real estate deals, happy to engage with those folks. And really that's who that program is best designed for. And so folks who are interested would just need to go to our website, which is redeeminvestments.com/mastermind, or contact me directly. And so I'm sure you'll provide my information here.
Yeah, we'll have all that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
One question on that is, with that initial kind of fee, you said something like $50,000 or something like that. Would that get you, do you get a piece of any equity off the bat, or is that just as the deals kind of come in, you'll be able to position yourself for equity for other deals?
Yeah, so to clarify, that 50,000 is in reference to the real estate education that I had purchased for us. The way that we're pricing this out for the mastermind is it's much less than that. In fact, I've seen other mastermind programs that cost upwards to $100,000. Ours is a tenth of that. Excuse me, and one of the major differentiators for our program is that $10,000 is automatically credited towards a deal that we buy during that year, and so it's really completely risk-free because it's being applied. And so in other words, typically our deal minimums have been $50,000 as a limited investor, And so, if someone wants to invest with us, instead of, writing a check for $50,000 or wiring that, they would only be doing it for 40 because 10 is already being credited towards their position.
Right. So, okay. So you got now you got a $10,000 credit if you wanted to do like an LP deal or something with you guys. And
Right.
now I just got to figure out the other 40 grand to get into the rest of that minimum that I got to hit.
Right.
But I still get all
Exactly.
the resources and all the education, the knowledge, like you said, syndication documents, those can be well over $10,000 in a lot of cases. And
Right.
being able to have something that you can kind of just tweak, or even something that an attorney can just kind of refinalize or whatever in your case.
And that's what you would do. And that's what you would do is, obviously while you get access to those documents, once you sort of tailor it to that specific deal you're working on, you still want to run it by an SEC attorney, but the cost of that is going to be far less.
Oh yeah.
Than
Unbelievable.
if they had to produce it. Yeah.
No, that's a great value, man. That's really interesting for me too. So I think we'll stay connected for sure on that. The last thing I just wanted to talk about before we wrap things up is, you've seen some things, man. You've been around, and it's just what advice do you have for our listeners who are getting started, or maybe they're just in a down spot right now? Maybe COVID kicked them on their back, and what do we have? What kind of advice do you have for them to kind of to get them to the next level?
Yeah, I think something that I try to talk about with my kids too is you when you talk about when you think about the duration of your life, and you take a step back from whatever chaos may be occurring in that moment, sometimes we can get caught up in how drastic or how what's the word I'm looking for? How drastic or how bad something may be, when in fact you're not even going to remember this moment from now or 2 years from now. And so that's the first thing is let's take a step back and take a look at, in the grand scheme of things, how much does this really matter?
It's like that 5-second rule, right? It's like, or the 5-minute rule. It's like, if it doesn't matter in 5 minutes or whatever it is, it doesn't matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 seconds thinking about it or something.
That's a great rule to live by, especially, I think in this sort of kind of bleeds into again the topic of spirituality and faith, is that, again, not to say I've arrived by any means, because this is something I consistently work on, is, in the grand scheme of eternity, which is a long time, how much does that bad thing that just happened really matter? You know what I mean? And the only time that you can't recover from something is when you quit. And so when you think about, moments in life where it can be counted as a victory or a loss, you never really lose unless you give up and unless you quit. So as long as you're continuing to stand back up when you get knocked back down, or when you get knocked down, you're still in the fight, and there's still a chance. And so, I think that's something, I need to remind myself, especially on days where, not everything goes my way. And I feel like, man, I did 9 things great, but this one thing, or maybe the ratio's, 5 and 5, I still got to focus on the 5 that we did well, and really recover from those other 5. And there's always tomorrow. Yeah,
that's awesome advice, man. And I think it is something to live by, right? How important is this when we really weigh it all out, and can we really focus on the things that really matter as far as our faith's concerned, or as far as, some big business decisions, instead of just these little things that just kind of are gnats and ankle biters, if you will. And I think that's something that I know I got to work on all the time. Just worrying about
got to work on that.
Sweating the small stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well,
no, that's good.
Well, absolutely beautiful, brother. Can you tell our listeners where they can get in contact with you directly? I know you said Redeem Investments for / mastermind, right? Was to get involved in the mastermind?
Yep. Yeah. So redeeminvestments.com / mastermind. I'm more than happy to speak with folks directly as well. So, my contact information, once you provide that, our website is in the midst of being redeveloped. We're actually in the midst of rebranding from one entity. So Redeem Realty Solutions is what we used to go under, and so that's now just a component of Redeem Investments. And so Redeem Investments now includes not only the Redeem Realty Solutions, which was our residential real estate stuff, but also the mastermind, and then of course all of our commercial real estate investments as well. So yeah, people can find me there. I'm still going by. My email address is still Christian@Redeem Realty Solutions, and so we've not yet transitioned there. But yeah, happy to talk with any folks and set up calls. And just want to add value to your listeners. Thank you again so much for having me, AJ. I really, really appreciate it.
This is an absolute pleasure. I've been wanting to get you on since Black Gold in November, so we finally got on.
Yeah, no, that was such a fun event for the folks within our circle, and I'm just glad that you're able to add value to folks that are listening, and I'm grateful to be part of it.
Once again, thank you so much for being on the show. You guys are listening to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews. You can listen to this podcast at aaronjarmstrong.com/podcasts. And we like to get a grad on here, especially grads in real estate, doing awesome things to share with you guys, just the power that's in this awesome network and what people can really accomplish. So without any further ado, guys, thank you so much. Be somebody.